just weeks after finalizing his divorce during the summer of 2012. 46-year-old businessman Frank Spencer was shot dead from a distance while entering his Hemlock Township, Pennsylvania home. His ex-wife, 47-year-old Maria Sanutti-Spencer, quickly landed at the top of the suspect list. Frank's friends told investigators that Maria had threatened him numerous times in the years leading up to his murder. They also suspected that Maria had committed a break-in and burned down Frank's mother's home, and Frank himself had predicted his own death, telling his friends that he knew he was going to be shot in the head. He reported Maria's disturbing conduct to the authorities, who later asserted that they did everything in their power and within the parameter of the law to protect Frank. While investigating Maria's suspected role in her ex-husband's death, detectives uncovered evidence that her father, Anthony Rocco Franklin, was also involved. In July of 2014, more than 2 years after Frank's death, a grand jury indicted the father-daughter duo on numerous charges, including criminal homicide. Maria Sanutti-Spencer was found guilty at trial in November of 2015 and is currently serving a life sentence plus 50 years at Muncie Prison in Lycoming County. After fighting extradition from South Africa for 2.5 years, Anthony Rocco Franklin was extradited to Pennsylvania, where he was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life without parole in October of 2018. The 83-year-old is serving his time at the State Correctional Institution in Somerset County. Maria has challenged her case in recent years, claiming that new evidence will prove her innocence and placing the blame for Frank's murder wholly on her father. She also argued that her attorney did not represent her properly, but her bid for a new trial was rejected in 2024. Number 29. Jessica Lopez. 22-year-old military wife Brittany Kilgore was living alone in Fallbrook, California in 2012 when she filed for divorce from her U.S. Marine husband, who was serving overseas in Afghanistan at the time. As she packed her belongings with plans to move back to her hometown in Missouri, she received a visit from her neighbor, 45-year-old former Marine Staff Sergeant Luis Ray Perez, whom she had recently befriended. Perez offered to help Kilgore pack if she agreed to go on a dinner cruise with him, but Kilgore initially said no. She knew Perez was dating 36-year-old Dorothy Grace Marilino and didn't want to cause any problems, but she needed the help, so she eventually said yes and was last seen leaving for the date that evening. At around 8 p.m, Kilgore's friend received an alarming one-word text message, "Help." 4 days later, Kilgore's murdered body was found in a ditch along a rural roadside. She had been smothered, strangled with a rope, which was still around her neck, and shot with a stun gun. There was also evidence that the killer had tried to dismember Kilgore's corpse before dumping it. Investigators quickly traced the crime to Perez and paid a visit to the home he shared with Marilino and a third roommate, 25-year-old Jessica Lopez. While there, they learned that the residence doubled as an S&M dungeon and that the trio were in a dominant submissive arrangement with one another. Perez acted as the leader of the household, while Marilino was the household mistress and Lopez was their slave. Lopez initially took sole credit for the murder, but after examining the evidence and the dynamic of her shared lifestyle with the other suspects, investigators determined that she wasn't the only person involved. And while Perez claimed he had dropped Kilgore off at a bar in downtown San Diego, phone data put the victim at his residence. According to prosecutors, Perez had lured an unsuspecting Kilgore to the residence where he, Marilino, and Lopez tortured the victim to death for their own sadistic pleasure. There was no evidence to suggest that Kilgore was aware of the nature of her neighbor's relationship, or that she herself would be forced to participate. In 2015, all 3 suspects were found guilty of Kilgore's murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Number 28. Angela Pollina. Forced to sleep in the freezing garage of his family's Long Island, New York home, a little boy with autism lost his battle against the elements in January of 2020. Home surveillance cameras captured footage of Thomas Valva and his brother Anthony shivering on the bare cement floor of their Center Moriches residence, while their father, an NYPD officer, Michael Valva, and their stepmother, Angela Pollina, lived comfortably indoors. While investigating Thomas's death, investigators learned that the brothers were banished to the garage as a punishment for urinating and defecating inside the house. In addition to forcing the children to withstand the frigid nighttime temperatures without even a blanket, Valva and Pollina were accused of starving the victims and subjecting them to other extreme forms of discipline, including physical abuse. In November of 2022, a jury found Michael Valva guilty of 5 charges, including second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 25 years to life. During Pollina's 2-week trial in early 2023, prosecutors revealed shocking evidence demonstrating the extent of her crimes, including text messages to Valva about Thomas being sneaky for desperately trying to stay warm with a dirty towel he found in a laundry basket. Taking the stand in her own defense, a seemingly remorseless Pollina testified that the garage was a little chilly, but that she was comfortable generating audible gasps from shocked jurors. She denied murdering Thomas, despite admittedly being his primary caretaker, plainly stating it was a tough environment and blaming her conduct on the boy's alleged behavior issues. Pollina showed little emotion throughout her trial, but she was visibly upset upon learning that she had been found guilty of second-degree murder and 4 counts of child endangerment. She received the maximum sentence of 25 years to life and will be 68 years old when she becomes eligible for parole in 2045. Number 27. Crystal Williams. 38-year-old Sunday school teacher Shane Williams was asleep in his bed at his Easley, South Carolina home when an intruder shot him in the head during the early morning hours of January 26, 2014. His wife of 14 years, 34-year-old Crystal Gail Williams, told police that she and the couple's young son awoke to the sound of gunshots shortly before 4 o'clock a.m. But there were no signs of forced entry, and deputies uncovered incriminating text messages between Crystal and the alleged gunman, 35-year-old Marcus Channing Johnson. According to authorities, the two had known each other since childhood but did not appear to be romantically involved. Pickens County prosecutors accused Williams of paying Johnson to kill Shane in hopes of collecting on a $250,000 life insurance policy. They were both charged accordingly, and in November of 2014, Williams pleaded guilty to murder and conspiracy in exchange for a life sentence without parole. She agreed to the deal for the sake of avoiding the possibility of the death penalty, which the authorities still intended to pursue against Johnson. In early 2017, more than 3 years after Shane's death, Johnson pleaded guilty to murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and possession of a weapon during a violent crime. In doing so, he managed to avoid the death penalty and was sentenced to life without parole. Number 26. Melanie McGuire. In May of 2004, fishermen and beachgoers found 3 suitcases filled with dismembered human remains in the waters of the Chesapeake Bay, identified as a 39-year-old computer programmer, U.S. Navy veteran, and father of 2 from New Jersey named Bill McGuire. The victim had been last seen alive weeks earlier. Bill's wife, 34-year-old Melanie McGuire, told investigators that her husband had stormed out of their house during an argument. She hadn't seen him since, and in the meantime had applied for a restraining order and filed for divorce, claiming that Bill had been abusive toward her during their marriage. Melanie didn't bother to mention that she was having a long-term affair with her boss at the fertility clinic where she worked, or that she had bought a gun just days before Bill disappeared. Investigators made these discoveries on their own, and their suspicions were further heightened when they realized that Melanie had bought the same kind of gun that had been used to kill her husband. Furthermore, someone in the McGuire household had recently conducted questionable internet searches, including how to commit a murder and undetectable poison. Electronic toll records showed that Melanie had traveled to the Chesapeake Bay area on the suspected day of Bill's murder. She claimed she passed through the area on her way to go shopping in Delaware, where there's no sales tax, and she admitted to moving Bill's car to a parking lot in Atlantic City, where it was found abandoned, but she claimed she did so as a prank. Melanie also acknowledged that she and Bill owned the luggage that Bill's remains were found in, but insisted she had nothing to do with his death. A year after Bill's murder, authorities finally felt that they had enough evidence to charge Melanie, arguing that Melanie wanted Bill out of the picture so she could pursue a real relationship with her illicit lover. Prosecutors accused her of drugging her husband with sedatives before shooting and dismembering him. Melanie's defense attorney claimed that Bill was a gambling addict who owed money to mobsters, and that he had possibly been murdered over unpaid debts. Testifying in her own defense, Melanie described Bill as increasingly moody and abusive in the weeks leading up to his disappearance and death, but her story failed to hold water in court, and she was found guilty of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life without parole, but continues to maintain her innocence from behind bars amid multiple failed attempts to challenge her case. Number 25. Julie Harper. By the time Julie Harper decided to leave her husband, Jason, during the summer of 2012, their marriage was beyond saving. The misery they lived in stood in stark contrast to their seemingly idyllic beginnings just a decade or so earlier. when they moved into their seaside Carlsbad, California home as newlyweds. 3 children and countless heated arguments later, Julie consulted with an attorney and filed for divorce. But a divorce wouldn't be necessary because tragedy struck just days later when 39-year-old Jason failed to show up at his teaching job. Concerned for his well-being, his colleagues paid a visit to his house where they found him dead with a gunshot wound to the chest. His wife and children were conspicuously absent from the scene, but Julie surrendered to law enforcement the following day in the company of a defense attorney. She refused to speak with investigators, but the evidence spoke for itself, and she was charged with Jason's murder. During her trial in the fall of 2014, Julie claimed that she had suffered for years at the hands of an abusive husband. She offered voice recordings and other evidence to back up her claims and took the stand in her own defense, telling the jury that the fight leading to Jason's death began after he accused her of hiding his laptop. The fight supposedly escalated into physical violence, and Julie said that she fought desperately to get away from her irate husband. She claimed that she had bought a gun the previous year for her own protection, and that she had made the fateful decision to retrieve it from under her pillow as Jason repeatedly charged at her and threatened her life. Julie denied purposely shooting Jason, telling jurors that the gun accidentally discharged. She was acquitted of first-degree murder at her first trial, but the jury became hopelessly deadlocked while trying to decide if she was guilty of second-degree murder. A second jury convicted Julie of second-degree murder, and she was sentenced to 40 years to life in prison. She maintains her innocence, but her attempts to challenge her case have failed thus far. Number 24. Rachiel Moore. It was no coincidence that 24-year-old Colby Vinson had recently won 50-50 custody of his young daughter when he was murdered inside his Navarre, Florida apartment. In March of 2023, he was spending an overnight visit with his daughter for the first time in a year when he was killed. And it was no secret that the child's mother, Rachiel Moore, and her family members were outraged by the ruling. Perhaps not surprisingly, all signs pointed toward Moore playing a role in Vinson's death. Further investigation revealed that Vinson had been shot dead by Moore's former stepfather, 55-year-old Jason Curtis, at Moore's request. Curtis was found guilty of first-degree murder following his trial in 2024 and is serving a mandatory life term. Following a 3-day trial in April 2025, a jury found Moore guilty of first-degree premeditated murder and tampering with evidence. She, too, was sentenced to life without parole, plus 15 years for the evidence tampering charge. Records show that she's in the process of appealing her case as she awaits transport to prison from the Santa Rosa County Jail. Number 23. Angelina Hamrick. 42-year-old U.S. Airman Jason Hamrick was reported missing in Claremont County, Ohio, in late June of 2019 after he failed to show up at a family event. Later that day, he was found dead in a ditch roughly a half-mile from his home. He had been shot in the head and had been dragged to the disposal site from elsewhere. At the time of his death, Jason was entangled in an acrimonious divorce from his estranged wife, Angelina Hamrick. Investigators questioned Angelina's boyfriend, Michael Clark, who revealed that Angelina had murdered Jason in order to obtain full custody of their 3 sons. He admitted to helping Angelina plan the crime and to call in the military several times prior to the murder in an attempt to get Jason in trouble. In the meantime, Jason was entirely unsuspecting of the dark forces at play. He even allowed Angelina to move into his home about a month before his death when she claimed she had nowhere else to go. Michael Clark was sentenced to probation after pleading guilty to an obstruction charge and agreeing to testify against Angelina in exchange for leniency. During Angelina's 3-week trial in the spring of 2021, prosecutors argued that Jason was executed in cold blood while lying on his sofa, refuting any claims that the deadly gunfire occurred during an argument. The defense claimed that Angelina struggled with isolation and cultural maladjustment after growing up in Russia and living in Japan and Korea before relocating to the US with Jason in 2015. But if the jury harbored any sympathy for the defendant, they did not show it through their verdict. Angelina was found guilty of aggravated murder with a gun specification and was sentenced to life with the possibility of parole after 30 years. Number 22. Glenna Duram. In a murder case that made news headlines around the world, 48-year-old Glenna Duram of Sand Lake, Michigan, was found guilty of her husband's murder with help from an unlikely witness, her pet African grey parrot, Bud, who kept repeating the words, "Don't shoot, don't shoot," in the aftermath of the crime. Police had initially believed that Glenna was a victim when they found both her and her husband, 46-year-old Marty Duram, suffering from gunshot wounds in May of 2016. Marty had been shot 5 times and was beyond saving, while Glenna was clinging to life with a single bullet wound below the ear. As Glenna recuperated from her injury, investigators discovered that she had hidden a plethora of debts from Marty prior to his death. On the day of the shooting, the couple's home was due to be auctioned off, and Glenna had managed to somehow keep the property's foreclosure a secret from her husband, but she knew that she would no longer be able to keep Marty in the dark about their financial troubles, according to prosecutors, who accused Glenna of shooting Marty during a fight over money. Handwritten notes, Glenna's secrets, and other traditional types of evidence already pointed toward her guilt. But the state also decided to present recordings of Bud's incriminating squawks during the trial in 2017. Marty's mother, Lillian, who adopted Bud after her son's death, told local reporters that bird picks up anything and everything. Glenna denied any involvement in her husband's murder but was found guilty of first-degree premeditated murder and sentenced to life without parole. She appealed her case, but remains incarcerated after her motion was denied. Number 21. Robin Hamilton. During the early morning hours of June 30th, 2013, career criminal Robin Hamilton and 3 accomplices robbed 2 women at gunpoint in Lower Manhattan. One of the victims later recalled having a gun pointed straight at her head when she refused to give up the PIN number to her bank card. Hamilton's first trial ended in a hung jury in 2014. When the case went to trial for a second time in 2018, one of the jurors asked to be released from service because her father-in-law had fallen gravely ill, in a move that generated a reaction of pure disgust from Manhattan Supreme Court Justice Edward McLaughlin. Hamilton refused to allow the juror to be replaced by an alternate, thereby forcing her to stay for the duration of the trial. Hamilton was found guilty, and Judge McLaughlin criticized the seemingly heartless act as a strategy to try forcing a mistrial, describing Hamilton as a plague on society. He sentenced the defendant to 51 years to life in prison and made a descriptive comment about how her career of menacing was over unless she happened to get into a fracas while serving her time at the Bedford Hills Women's Prison in Westchester County. Hamilton's defense attorney asserted his client's claim to innocence in the aftermath of McLaughlin's cutting remarks, having argued at trial that the defendant had been misidentified as the culprit. Number 20. Crystal Stevens. In what one prosecutor later described as the worst homicide of its kind that he had ever dealt with in his career, an autistic boy named Brandon Tuku Steckler Jr. was tortured and killed at the Las Vegas home of his caretaker Crystal Stevens in July of 2018. His body bore signs of horrific abuse and neglect, including bruises, burns, pneumonia, sepsis, and malnutrition, and a toxicology test revealed that he had methamphetamine in his system when he died. Stevens had agreed to care for Steckler after his mother fell on hard times and ended up in a homeless shelter. The little boy died just 3 weeks later, and it was immediately apparent to emergency responders that he had not simply drowned, like Stevens had claimed. Police arrested Stevens that same day, and she remained in county lockup for nearly 7 years, while her case worked its way through the court system. Prosecutors planned to pursue the death penalty, but Stevens avoided capital punishment and was sentenced to life without parole after pleading guilty to first-degree murder. First-degree kidnapping resulted in substantial bodily harm and child abuse. During her sentencing hearing in May of 2025, she tearfully apologized for her actions and reassured Steckler's family that she took full responsibility for her crimes. Number 19. Fantasy Decuir. Photographer Edward French was snapping pictures in San Francisco's Twin Peaks neighborhood on July 6th of 2017 when a 20-something couple approached a 71-year-old and robbed him at gunpoint. Later identified as Lamont Mims and Fantasy Decuir, the assailants shot French in the heart and kicked him to the ground before fleeing the scene. The pair proceeded to another neighborhood where they attempted to sell the victim's stolen camera and were arrested for French's murder after attempting to rob a pair of tourists at gunpoint a few weeks later. Community members were both shaken and infuriated by the crime, especially after learning that Mims had been released from custody just days earlier following his arraignment on a gun charge. Mims and Decuir were found guilty of robbery following a trial in 2023, but prosecutors retried them for murder the following year and came out on the winning end. In December 2024, more than 7 years after French's murder, both defendants were sentenced to life without parole, finally ending a long and painful chapter for French's loved ones. Number 18. Lisa Snyder. In an unspeakable act of violence that shook a Pennsylvania community to its core, siblings Connor and Brinley Snyder were found unresponsive and hanging in the basement of their Albany Township home in late 2019. It was too late to revive the young victims, whose mother, 36-year-old Lisa Snyder, quickly landed at the top of the suspect list. Lisa told police that her children were bullied, but this claim was refuted by both staff and students at their school. As it turned out, they were both well-liked and they seemed happy, and considering the victims' ages, it was extremely unlikely that either of them had engineered their own demise. 10 weeks after Connor and Brinley's deaths, authorities charged Lisa with their murders. Shortly after her arrest, prosecutor John Adams told reporters that Lisa had told a friend that she had had enough of her kids, although at that point investigators were still in the process of attempting to establish a definitive motive for the disturbing double homicide. Further investigation revealed an array of incriminating internet searches for information about death by hanging and how to kill someone. Lisa had also recently watched episodes of the docu-series I Almost Got Away With It, which only added to existing suspicions that she had murdered her children. The case languished in the court system until the fall of 2024, when Lisa Snyder was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder, which carries an automatic life sentence without parole in Pennsylvania. She sat emotionless, while the judge tacked on an additional 8.5 to 17 years for child endangerment and evidence tampering. Her reasons for her actions remain a mystery to this day. Number 17. Rachiel Henry. Shortly before 7:30 p.m. on January 20th, 2020, police responded to an unknown trouble call at a Phoenix, Arizona home where they found 3 very young siblings unresponsive in the living room. Later identified as Zane Henry, Mariah Henry, and Catalea Rios, the children were pronounced dead after life-saving efforts failed to resuscitate them. Their mother, 22-year-old Rachiel Henry, initially claimed that the kids had been sick but later admitted to suffocating them. The scene and the circumstances surrounding the case were so traumatic that several first responders, police officers, and legal team members needed therapy to cope with what they had experienced. According to court documents, Henry had recently relocated to the area from Oklahoma. She reportedly struggled with a methamphetamine addiction and had been acting strange in the days leading up to her kids' deaths. Henry pleaded not guilty to 3 counts of first-degree murder and remained in county lockup for the next several years before changing her plea to guilty in late 2024. Prosecutors agreed to drop the death penalty in exchange for her plea, and she was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Describing the punishment as appropriate, Henry's defense team said that she had sorrowfully accepted her fate and that she was ready to spend the rest of her life behind bars to make up for what she had done. Number 16. Deka Simmons. On October 5th, 2023, police in Colorado Springs received an anonymous tip about a bag of human remains in a local culvert. Officers recovered the bones, which were identified as the remains of 48-year-old Dashimo Siha. By then, investigators had already concluded that Siha had been killed and a suspect, 40-year-old Deka Simmons, was in custody on suspicion of first-degree murder. Prosecutors accused Simmons of killing Siha out of an unrestrained hatred for child predators after learning that the victim had engaged in inappropriate relations with a minor. The relationship in question had occurred more than 2 decades earlier when Siha dated a 17-year-old girl at the age of 25. According to the authorities, Simmons shot Siha in a garage, then dismembered his body and stored it in a freezer. She later moved the remains using a vehicle before ultimately dumping them in the location where they were found. Investigators connected her to the crime through blood evidence at the crime scene, which had enabled prosecutors to bring charges against the suspect prior to the discovery of Siha's body. Simmons was reportedly a suspect in at least 3 other homicides, but was only ever charged with Siha's murder. She was found guilty as charged during the summer of 2024 and was sentenced to life without parole, plus 24 years for tampering with a corpse and 3 years for tampering with physical evidence. Number 15. Chelsea Crossland. While responding to a report about an unresponsive child in Jay County, Indiana, in March of 2022, police found a little boy named Christian Crossland dead. An autopsy would later find that he had succumbed to blunt force injuries, starvation and dehydration. Christian's mother, 27-year-old Chelsea Crossland, was charged with murder and neglect of a dependent, resulting in the death. According to court documents, Chelsea had confined Christian to her room, banned him from interacting with his 4 siblings, and forced him to sleep on the floor of her closet. She also physically abused her son and withheld food from him for not knowing his ABCs. After speaking with Christian's siblings and examining the evidence, investigators concluded that the abuse went on for roughly 2.5 months before ending in tragedy. In August of 2023, Chelsea was found guilty and sentenced to life without parole. She challenged her conviction and sentence, arguing that she was denied access to an impartial jury due to pre-trial publicity. But the original verdict and punishment were upheld by the state's Supreme Court in 2025. Number 14. Kimberly Hammond. 42-year-old Randy Weimerskirch was found unresponsive in his Clinton, Iowa home shortly after 2 o'clock in the morning on New Year's Day in 2023. He'd been shot in the head and was pronounced dead at a nearby hospital. Investigators traced the crime to Weimerskirch's ex-girlfriend, 25-year-old Kimberly A. Hammond, and her alleged accomplices, 25-year-old Justice K. Foley and 28-year-old Donovan Chambers. According to court documents, Hammond and Foley had gone to Weimerskirch's home in an attempt to collect money that he supposedly owed to Hammond. Witnesses later recalled hearing 2 women pounding on the door and demanding money. Hammond, Foley, and Chambers were arrested during a traffic stop a few hours after the victim's body was discovered. Foley pleaded guilty to a reduced second-degree robbery charge in September 23 and was sentenced to 10 years in prison with credit for time served. Chambers pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor accessory charge in early 2025 and was sentenced to a year of probation. The jury found Hammond guilty of first-degree murder following her trial in January of this year, resulting in a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Number 13. Marique Ruth. 41-year-old father of two, John Killen, was fatally shot during an argument with his girlfriend, Marique Ruth, at the couple's Altoona, Iowa home in August of 2022. Ruth claimed that she had acted in self-defense, telling investigators that Killen had come home intoxicated and started an argument. She said that she retrieved her gun out of a fear for her safety and ordered Killen to leave the home, but that he refused, and she claimed that she only made the decision to pull the trigger and shoot Killen 3 times when he came at her, but she was nevertheless charged with his murder. Prosecutors accused Ruth of starting and escalating the argument that led to the deadly shooting, while also asserting that Killen had every right to refuse to leave his own home. The jury agreed, and in late 2024, Ruth was found guilty of first-degree murder, which carries an automatic sentence of life without parole in the state of Iowa. The judge described mandatory punishment as deserved, stating that he would not have hesitated to sentence Ruth to life without parole, even if he wasn't required to do so. Number 12. Stacy Rodriguez. 35-year-old Christopher Dickerson probably never imagined that an innocent outing to a Greeley, Colorado bar would end in his murder. But that's what happened in October of 2021, after he invited 2 young women, Stacy Rodriguez and Hosanna Varela, back to his house after crossing paths at a local watering hole. During what was supposed to be a casual gathering, Rodriguez stabbed Dickerson to death and then set his house on fire. Both she and Varela were charged in connection with the incident, and Varela opted to plead guilty to arson, tampering with the deceased body, and accessory after the fact. She was sentenced to 32 years in prison. In late 2024, Rodriguez chose to take her case to trial. During the proceedings, which took place in early 2025, she was frequently seen smiling and displaying a seemingly nonchalant demeanor, despite the severity of the allegations she faced, prompting prosecutors to accuse her of failing to take the justice process seriously. She was found guilty of first-degree murder, first-degree arson, tampering with a deceased human body, and 2 counts of burglary, and is serving life without parole. Number 11. Miriam Helmick. On June 10, 2008, police responded to a Whitewater, Colorado home where they found 64-year-old businessman Alan Helmick dead in his kitchen from a gunshot wound to the head. His wife, Miriam, told officers that she believed her husband had been killed by a burglar, but she landed at the center of the investigation after evidence surfaced of a previous attempt to kill Alan by blowing up his car, while Miriam tested negative for gunshot residue and was not connected to the crime through any other forensic evidence. Cell phone location data and other circumstantial evidence pointed toward her involvement in her husband's murder. Perhaps even more suspiciously, she fled to the Jacksonville, Florida home of her adult son, who later testified against her at trial. When law enforcement tracked her down, she initially pretended to be Alan's first wife, Sharon, who had passed away more than 5 years earlier. A jury found Miriam guilty of murder in 2010, resulting in a life sentence without parole. The now 68-year-old, who has maintained her innocence from the very beginning, appealed her case 3 times over the following years, but was unsuccessful each time, with her latest denial occurring in April of 2024. Number 10. Celeste Owens. In what a Gwinnett County, Georgia judge later described as the most evil case of child cruelty she had ever seen, a young girl named Amari Hall was found murdered in a wooded area after being reported missing by her mother, Brittany Hall, in November of 2021. She had suffered several broken ribs, internal bleeding, and malnourishment, leading to the conclusion that she had died from abuse. While searching the phone of Brittany's girlfriend, Celeste Owens, police found videos depicting horrifying mistreatment toward Amari. Both Brittany and Owens were charged with murder and numerous other crimes. Following her trial in late 2024, Owens was found guilty as charged of 21 counts, including malice murder, felony murder, child cruelty, aggravated battery, aggravated assault, making a false statement, and concealing the death of another. Jurors listened to heartbreaking testimony from Amari's siblings, who testified that the victim never woke up after having tissue stuffed into her mouth. Owens was sentenced to life without parole plus 235 years. Brittany Hall also faces nearly 24 charges and is currently awaiting trial. Number 9. Camille Lewis. In January of 2023, a concerned grandmother contacted police in Tulsa, Oklahoma, about her son, Orlando Hugger Jr., whom she hadn't seen in years. She told investigators that her daughter, Camille Lewis, had told her that Hugger was dead while dropping off the boy's malnourished and abused sister at the senior citizen's home. Police interviewed Hugger's sister, who recounted unspeakable mistreatment at the hands of the sibling's stepfather, John Miles III. Further investigation revealed that Hugger had been murdered nearly 2 years earlier and that Miles had buried his body in a park before digging it up and burning it months later. Camille Lewis initially denied any knowledge of her son's whereabouts, claiming that Hugger had run away. She later admitted that Hugger had died in her arms and confessed to participating in the abuse that had claimed his life and nearly killed his sister. In 2024, Lewis pleaded guilty to child abuse and neglect, second-degree murder and desecration of a corpse. She was sentenced to 35 years to life in prison in exchange for her willingness to testify against Miles, who was found guilty and sentenced to 7 life terms in early 2025. Number 8. Susan Eubanks. Susan Eubanks became one of very few women to be sentenced to death row in 1999, when she was convicted of 4 counts of first-degree murder in California for killing her 4 sons. She shot the victims in the head in 1997 inside the family's San Diego home while going through a divorce from her husband Eric, who had recently moved out of the residence. On the day of the murders, Eubanks and her boyfriend, Renee Dodson, had spent the afternoon at a bar. Witnesses would later describe Eubanks as agitated, rude and subdued, but showing no signs of intoxication. The couple argued after returning home, and the victims, Matthew, Austin, Brigham and Brandon, were killed at some point after Dodson fled the home and called law enforcement due to concerns about Eubanks' behavior. By the time police responded to the scene, it was too late to save the boys. California's death penalty cases hit an impasse in 2019 when Governor Gavin Newsom imposed a moratorium on capital punishment. Given the unlikelihood of her punishment ever being carried out, Eubanks challenged her sentence, and in October of 2024, the now 60-year-old was resentenced to life without parole. Number 7. Javonna Lewis. In December of 2020, 21-year-old Javonna Lewis took her teenage girlfriend to a seedy motel in Bakersfield, California, and forced her to sell her body. In addition to being trafficked, the victim suffered a brutal assault at the hands of Lewis, who dragged her into a room and beat her as a punishment for napping instead of turning tricks. The attack lasted for 3 hours, and prosecutors later said that the victim was lucky she didn't suffer worse injuries. She escaped afterward and was reunited with her family after being hospitalized. In the meantime, Lewis was arrested for her crimes. The case went to trial in January of 2025, more than 4 years after the assault, and Lewis was found guilty of human trafficking, pimping out a minor, and torture. In a rare example of a defendant receiving a life sentence despite not killing anyone, she was ordered to remain behind bars for the rest of her natural life with no possibility of parole. While imposing the punishment, Judge Judith Dulcich described Lewis's actions as one of the most heinous cases of its type during her time on the bench, and frankly, even before that. Number 6. Amanda Don Soultz. After arriving in Fayette County, West Virginia in January of 2023, 32-year-old Amanda Don Soultz and 29-year-old Andres Torres Jr. pawned a watch to 41-year-old Michelle Smith for $50. After seeing that Smith had advertised the watch for sale on Facebook the following month, Soultz and Torres went to her home, retrieved the watch, and attacked Smith. The victim's son arrived home to find his mother handcuffed, beaten, and shot in her bedroom. She passed away in the hospital about a month later, and authorities charged Soultz and Torres with her murder. In January of 2025, Torres was found guilty of murder and conspiracy to commit murder and was sentenced to life without parole. Soultz pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and was sentenced to life with mercy. She'll become eligible for parole after serving 15 years, but could remain behind bars until her dying day, depending on whether the parole board feels that she has been rehabilitated when she attempts to regain her freedom. Number 5. Verity Beck. 73-year-old Reed Beck and his wife, 72-year-old Miriam, were shot dead inside their Abington, Pennsylvania home and dismembered with a chainsaw in January of 2023. Their adult son discovered their slain bodies after not hearing from them and going to the residence to check on his parents. The man also encountered his sister, 45-year-old former schoolteacher Verity Beck, who admitted that something very bad had happened to their mother and father when confronted about the bloody scene. According to authorities, Verity was experiencing financial hardship and had recently been accused of stealing from the victims. She pleaded guilty but mentally ill to her parents' murders in September 2024, despite being found competent to stand trial after undergoing several mental evaluations. The judge accepted Verity's plea, and while prosecutors opted not to seek the death penalty, she was sentenced to the maximum of life without parole. She's reportedly receiving mental treatment during her time behind bars so that she does not pose a threat to herself or others. Number 4. Ivie Demolina. In one of the more controversial cases on today's list, Ivie Demolina endured unspeakable abuse before being sentenced to life in prison for murder, robbery, and burglary during the mid-1990s. She was the established ringleader of a gang of thieves who killed James Polites and Joseph Fiametta in their New York and New Jersey homes. Demolina had many talents. She was an aspiring fashion designer, musician, and had even worked as a stockbroker. But she turned to crime after falling in with the wrong crowd, and she helped mastermind the deadly robberies out of a desire to no longer sell her body for a living. She maintained her innocence throughout her trial, but was nevertheless found guilty in 2 separate cases, resulting in consecutive sentences of 25 years to life and 30 years to life. During her first decades in prison, Demolina married her pen pal, became an accomplished writer, and made a concerted effort to better herself and show that she's been rehabilitated. Many people believe Demolina deserves a chance at freedom, and she would soon be eligible for parole if her sentences were running concurrently. She maintains that she did not directly participate in either of the murders she was convicted of, and is hoping to fight for her freedom, but lacks the money to retain an experienced attorney with the skills to give her a realistic chance of winning her case. Number 3. Ann Bragg. In September of 2002, 46-year-old Tom Bragg was found murdered in his Thomaston, Georgia home by a neighbor. The long-haul driver had recently broken his ankles during a church renovation job gone wrong, and was hoping to return to his job but never got the chance. He had been bludgeoned to death with the claw end of a hammer, but there were no signs of a break-in or a robbery, prompting detectives to take a deeper look at those closest to him. Tom's wife, Ann, seemed devastated about her husband's murder, but those who knew the couple revealed that their marriage had been on the rocks for some time. In addition to having a wandering eye, she had previously tried to recruit a hitman to murder another gentleman, and had recently taken out a life insurance policy on Tom. Mary was charged with Tom's murder in 2005, and in September of 2006, she was found guilty on all counts, including malice murder, felony murder, and aggravated assault. She was sentenced to life without parole, but has never admitted her guilt and continues to receive the support of many loved ones who believe in her innocence.
As always, thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe, and maybe it will be your video that we'll be doing next.
Number 2. Maureen Rickards. On July 11th, 2024, British police discovered the murdered remains of 65-year-old Jeremy Rickards inside the Canterbury, Kent home that he shared with his wife of 27 years, 50-year-old Maureen. He had been reported missing nearly a week earlier by his adult daughter, and it was evident based on his injuries that he had been stabbed and strangled to death. Suspicion naturally fell on Maureen, who did not deny killing her husband, but claimed that she had suffered from years of abuse at Jeremy's hands. But her story did not align with the evidence, which included videos she had recorded of herself assaulting Jeremy and stating her intention to kill him. Acquaintances also testified to signs of abuse, including facial injuries, that they had seen on Jeremy on numerous occasions. Maureen was found guilty of Jeremy's murder following a trial in early 2025. She was sentenced to life with a minimum of 22 years, which means she'll be in her early 70s when she reaches her first opportunity at regaining her freedom. If you have not yet seen our episode about when housewives go wrong, then be sure to stick around after number 1. They might not all be serving life, but they got caught for some pretty serious offenses. Number 1. Lori Isenberg. On a cold February morning in 2018, 911 dispatchers in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, received a panicked call from 65-year-old Lori Isenberg. Her husband, 68-year-old Larry Isenberg, had supposedly fallen overboard during a sunrise boat ride while leaning over to inspect a broken propeller and was now missing. Furthermore, Lori claimed that she had tripped, hit her head, and fallen unconscious while trying to rush to Larry's aid, and that any trace of him was gone by the time she came to. Despite this, she admittedly spent over an hour driving the boat around and looking for her husband before dialing 911. Given the frigid temperatures, it was an unusual time of year for a morning boat ride, making investigators immediately suspicious of Lori's story. Police were further thrown off by Lori's bizarre story, which changed several times throughout the course of the investigation. A few weeks later, a separate investigation found evidence that Lori had committed serious financial crimes. She was accused of embezzling over $500,000 while running a non-profit called the North Idaho Housing Coalition, which helps low-income people obtain stable housing. As the investigation into Larry's disappearance continued, Lori was charged with 40 counts of forgery and 1 count of grand theft. A month after Larry vanished, his body was found in the lake. A toxicology report revealed that he had a lethal level of Benadryl in his system when he died, furthering investigators' suspicions of foul play. By then, Lori had gone on the run and skipped 2 of her court dates for the fraud case. She finally turned herself in more than 4 months later. In early 2019, Lori pleaded guilty to 4 fraud-related counts and was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison. Authorities finally charged her with Larry's murder the following year. Prosecutors accused her of killing Larry because she knew that her financial crimes would soon receive press coverage and that Larry would likely divorce her. The couple's marriage had long been plagued by financial problems, which Larry had blamed on Lori for constantly forking money over to their adult children. In 2021, Lori entered an offered plea to a reduced second-degree murder charge, which meant that she maintained her innocence but admitted that the prosecution likely had a strong enough case to secure a conviction against her. In the event of a trial, she was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 30 years. In Atlanta, Georgia, Portia Williams turned herself in after a warrant for her arrest was issued after her fight with a Real Housewives of Atlanta co-star. The Daily Mail reported that things turned physical between 31-year-old Williams and 43-year-old Kenya Moore during the filming of the show's finale. Footage from the show revealed that Williams charged at Moore and pulled her hair. The pair traded insults before they both ended up on the floor. The incident was over in a matter of seconds. However, a police investigation was sparked by Moore, who filed charges against Williams. On the evening of April the 16th of 2014, Williams was booked into the Fulton County Sheriff's Office on a battery misdemeanor charge. She posted a $2,000 surety bond and was released. According to her lawyer, Williams also planned to press felony aggravated assault charges against her accuser for allegedly attacking her first, although it was unclear if any charges were actually filed. On March the 26th of 2023, Williams appeared on Watch What Happens Live with Andy Cohen. When a fan asked her about Moore, she responded with, "We're in a better place." Number 11. Teresa Giudice. 41-year-old Teresa Giudice and her husband were charged with conspiracy to commit mail fraud, wire fraud, and bank fraud, among others, on July the 29th, 2013. According to court documents, the Real Housewives of New Jersey original cast member and her husband, Joe Giudice, filed for bankruptcy in Newark federal court and claimed they owed creditors more than $10 million. Their bankruptcy papers stated that the couple owed $104,000 in credit cards and $85,600 in home repairs alone. An auction of furniture from their Montville, New Jersey home was initially scheduled for August the 22nd of 2010, but was postponed and then cancelled as the couple withdrew their bankruptcy petition. Finally, in 2013, the government caught wind of their shenanigans, and on top of the aforementioned charges, Teresa and Joe were also accused of making false statements on loan applications and a bankruptcy fraud, which allegedly saw them net over $5 million over a 10-year period. After accepting a deal with federal prosecutors, the pair pleaded guilty to 41 counts of fraud in March of 2014. 7 months later, Teresa was sentenced to 15 months in federal prison, while Joe was handed a 41-month sentence, followed by deportation to Italy. Additionally, they were required to pay $414,000 in restitution. Number 10. Anna Quincoces. A former cast member of The Real Housewives of Miami was arrested after allegedly tracking down her ex-boyfriend's new girlfriend. Anna Quincoces drove down to her ex-boyfriend's home in Key Largo, Florida, in the early hours of March the 22nd of 2015. According to the Daily Mail, the 50-year-old barged into the residence searching for his new girlfriend. A 911 call placed by the homeowner picked up a shouting match between Quincoces, her former partner, and the new girlfriend. Quincoces yelled at them, saying she came all this way after a night of drinking and had no intention of going anywhere. The man tried to convince her to leave several times. When Monroe County deputies arrived at the scene, they agreed to let the belligerent woman go, but warned her not to drive because she appeared intoxicated and her license had been suspended a month earlier. A few hours later, she was spotted driving her car by the same officers. She was pulled over and claimed that the reason she was out driving again was because of a cockroach infestation at her friend's home where she'd been staying. Quincoces said that because of it, she drove away in a desperate attempt to get away from the creepy critters. Ultimately, she was arrested and booked into a Plantation Key jail for the misdemeanor violation. Number 9. Kim Richards. In the early morning hours of April the 16th, 2015, police were called to the Beverly Hills Hotel's Swanky Polo Lounge after California woman Kim Richards allegedly refused to leave. According to local law enforcement, Richards was displaying symptoms of alcohol intoxication, including slurred speech and belligerent, insolent behavior. She reportedly berated the officers and passively resisted arrest. The 50-year-old was then taken into custody and charged with 3 misdemeanors, specifically public intoxication, resisting arrest, and battery on a police officer. Nearly 4 months later, Rickards was arrested again, this time for shoplifting $600 worth of merchandise at a Target store in Los Angeles. She was released a day after her arrest on a $5,000 bond. The former Real Housewives of Beverly Hills star initially accepted a plea deal to do 3 years of summary probation, 30 days of community labor, and 52 weeks of Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. But this was later adjusted to 450 hours of community service. The Daily Mail reported that Rickards completed the terms of her probation in late 2017. Number 8. Jennifer Shah. "I am sorry my actions have hurt innocent people," said Jennifer Shah from Park City, Utah, in a statement during her sentencing hearing in connection to her fraud-related criminal activity. A case was investigated by Homeland Security investigations between 2012 and 2016. Authorities determined that Shah's fraud scheme allegedly targeted and exploited vulnerable, often elderly working-class people. According to an HSI agent, Shah and her co-conspirators built their publicly lavish lifestyles on the false promises of financial independence offered to their victims. In March 2021, the 47-year-old Real Housewives of Salt Lake City star was arrested while filming for season 2 of the show. Fox News reported that cameras were rolling when Homeland Security officers and the New York Police Department arrived at the Beauty Lab parking lot, where the cast had gathered before leaving for a trip. She was arrested on charges of conspiracy to commit money laundering and conspiracy to commit wire fraud in connection with a telemarketing scheme. Shah reportedly maintained her innocence throughout the initial proceedings but entered a guilty plea in which the money laundering charges was dropped. As part of an agreement, she forfeited $6.5 million and agreed to pay restitution of up to $9.5 million. Ultimately, she was sentenced to 78 months, followed by an additional 5 years of supervised release. She was ordered to serve her time at the federal prison camp in Bryan, Texas. Number 7. Shannon Beador. On the evening of September the 16th of 2023, California woman Shannon Beador reportedly crashed into an apartment complex in Newport Beach. Details of the crash were unclear as of the latest updates, but the 59-year-old was accused of colliding with the building, located on Via Oporto and Via Lido. Beador's vehicle barely missed the front door of one of the apartment units in the aftermath. The building was left with visible damage. According to witnesses, the car drove away from the crash with the front bumper dragging on the road. CBS News Los Angeles reported that a trail of spilled oil was left on the street outside of the complex, showing the route the car took as it fled from the spot of the collision. At around 1 a.m., Beador was located a quarter-mile away from the Lido Village shopping area. The star from The Real Housewives of Orange County was arrested for the hit and run that occurred while she was allegedly under the influence of drugs or alcohol. Before taking her into custody, she was first taken to a hospital for treatment of minor injuries that she had suffered in the crash. Police subsequently released her on a $2,500 bond. Number 6. Danielle Staub. 46-year-old housewife of New Jersey star Danielle Staub's shocking past as a felon came to light in early June of 2009. It was revealed when her co-star brandished a book titled Cop Without a Badge during one of the show's episodes. The book was published in 1996 by Kevin Mayer, who was reportedly a paid FBI and DEA informant. According to the New York Post, it was revealed that in 1986, Staub was involved in an outrageous scheme to get money out of the wealthy father of a young man from Buffalo who owed money to her drug-dealing boyfriend, Daniel Aguilar. The couple allegedly kidnapped the boy, drove him to a payphone, and made him call his dad before demanding $25,000 in ransom. After the father wired the money, he called the authorities. Officers tracked Staub and Aguilar at an apartment in Miami, Florida, and arrested them on charges of extortion, kidnapping, and drug possession. While Staub has insisted her involvement in the incident was minimal, documents filed in Miami's U.S. District Court stated that she threatened injury or death to the victim if money wasn't delivered. The documents also revealed that police discovered more than 13 pounds of cocaine and $16,000 cash during the arrest. Staub cooperated with the FBI in exchange for a more lenient punishment. In the end, she was sentenced to drug treatment and weekly urinalysis tests for 6 months, which was later extended as recommended by her substance abuse counselor. Number 5. Dana Wilkie. A former Real Housewives of Beverly Hills star was reportedly pleading with a federal court judge to not sentence her to the maximum of 20 years in prison in her criminal case. Dana Wilkie had been arrested along with 2 associates on June the 18th, 2014. According to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Wilkie was indicted with conspiracy to commit wire fraud, aiding and abetting, and making false statements to government agents. She was president of a Blue Shield vendor company called Adwill Agency. Through Adwill Agency accounts, Wilkie allegedly issued Lisa Phoenix, Skylar Phoenix, and Rodeo Pink, a shell corporation held by Skylar, at least 87 checks totaling approximately $360,000 in illegal and undisclosed kickbacks between 2006 and 2012 for work that was never done. Law enforcement believed she should have known the arrangement would be fraudulent. Court documents indicated that the 41-year-old woman accepted a plea deal in March of 2016. She pleaded guilty to misprision of a felony in another court appearance in October of the same year. Wilkie asked the judge for leniency with her sentence, stating she had no idea that her business partner had been defrauding people, nor was she aware of any deceptions by the woman. Radar Online reported that she asked for 5 years of probation and 6 months of monitoring with the location monitoring program. It never became clear what sentences Wilkie received, if any. When a Twitter user asked her on the online platform if she ended up going to prison, she responded the matter was settled and it was found that there was no fraud. Number 4. Julianne Jules Weinstein. Julianne Jules Weinstein was arrested in Florida on a charge of domestic battery after allegedly attacking her estranged husband, 48-year-old Michael Weinstein, in front of their 2 children. Apparently, the couple separated after the former Real Housewives of New York City star accused Michael of cheating on her. Subsequently, the latter filed for divorce in July of 2016, while they were doing a custody exchange of their 2 children on February the 23rd of 2020 at a grocery store parking lot in Boca Raton. The 2 reportedly got into a verbal dispute. According to a police report, the 39-year-old licked Michael's car window before damaging it with a baseball bat and then punching the man in the face. Records indicated that Julianne was booked in Palm Beach County's main detention center and released shortly after. The following day, Julianne and Michael were in court. Michael's lawyer told People magazine that his client had obtained a protective order against Julianne. Subsequent information indicated that Julianne pleaded not guilty to the battery charge. Number 3. Felicity Kendall Huffman. A Desperate Housewives actress was sentenced to 14 days in prison for her role in what authorities called the largest college admissions scam ever prosecuted. The highly publicized scandal, in which at least 53 people were charged, arose in 2019. Prosecutors said that William Rick Singer masterminded and facilitated cheating on standardized tests or bribing college coaches to give students an advantage in the admissions process. Of those charged, 33 parents of college applicants allegedly paid a total of at least $25 million between 2011 and 2018 to the mastermind. The parents, including Felicity Kendall Huffman, were accused of conspiring with Singer. On March the 12th of 2019, the 56-year-old actress was arrested at her California home by FBI and IRS agents and charged with conspiracy to commit mail fraud and honest services fraud. Huffman appeared in Los Angeles federal court on March the 13th, where federal agents took her passport and the court released her on $250,000 bail. 2 months later, she pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit mail fraud and honest services mail fraud In early September, she wrote a letter to Judge Indira Talwani explaining why she felt she had to participate in the scam. Huffman stated that she'd worked with Singer's college counseling and preparation business legitimately for a year to try to improve her eldest daughter's math SAT scores. However, the scores didn't improve, and Singer warned her that none of the colleges her daughter was interested in would consider her auditions for their acting programs. Huffman claimed that Singer eventually offered to have a proctor boost the daughter's scores. She said she struggled with the offer for weeks before giving in and paying $15,000 to rig her daughter's test. During her sentencing hearing in federal court on September the 13th of 2019, she apologized to Judge Talwani and her family, in addition to her 2-week prison sentence. Huffman was required to serve 1 year of probation, perform 250 hours of community service, and pay a $30,000 fine. Number 2. Luann de Lesseps. Luann Nadeau, famously known as Luann de Lesseps, a main character in the first 6 seasons of The Real Housewives of New York, was arrested in Palm Beach, Florida. The incident unfolded shortly after 11 p.m. on December the 23rd of 2017, when local police were called to the Colony Hotel on a report of an unwanted person in a hotel room. Police said responding officers found 52-year-old de Lesseps, who was smelling of alcohol, slurring her speech, and appearing to be highly intoxicated. After she was placed under arrest and put in the back seat of the police cruiser, she reportedly told police, "Don't touch me, I'm going to kill you." An arrest report indicated that de Lesseps resisted arrest, hit an officer in the face with a door, and pushed officers away. During her court appearance the following day, the judge told her to hire herself a defense attorney rather than ignore the charges. She was then released without bond and permitted to return to New York. In July of 2018, she pleaded guilty to battery, trespassing, and disorderly intoxication. As part of a plea deal she was given 1 year probation in lieu of jail time and required to perform 50 hours of community service, among other conditions. In December of 2021, de Lesseps launched a non-alcoholic wine, Fosse Rosé, which she was promoting but clearly not drinking, because on the night of March the 16th of 2022, she drunkenly took over the mic at the Gay Piano Bar Townhouse in Manhattan. As a result, the crowd began booing her, to which de Lesseps allegedly responded, "You don't know me, I'm a cabaret star." Video taken by a patron showed her uttering profanities in between lyrics. A witness claimed that the woman yelled at other patrons and was eventually thrown out for getting aggressive with the bar's customers. Number 1. Lindsay June Sandiford. A British woman and the only real housewife on our list, was sentenced to death by firing squad on January the 22nd of 2013 for smuggling an estimated $2.6 million worth of cocaine into Bali, Indonesia. Lindsay June Sandiford from Redcar, England, was arrested on May the 19th of 2012 after arriving at Bali's Ngurah Rai International Airport on a flight from Bangkok, Thailand, when a routine luggage search uncovered 10.6 pounds of the white powder stuffed in her luggage. The Daily Mail reported that Sandiford, who had no previous convictions, claimed that she'd been forced by a UK-based drug syndicate to smuggle cocaine from Thailand to Indonesia by threats to the life of her family in Britain. She reportedly cooperated with authorities in a sting to arrest people higher up in the syndicate. Nevertheless, she received a death sentence afterwards, sparking an outcry from human rights lawyers and former UK Director of Public Prosecutions, Ken MacDonald, who said she had been treated with quite extraordinary severity. A judge panel headed by Amser Simanjuantak concluded that Sandiford had weakened the government's fight against drugs and damaged the image of Bali as a tourism destination, saying they found no reason to lighten her sentence. After hearing the panel, the 56-year-old housewife broke down in tears and cried. She was then booked into the Kerabokan prison. Sandiford later appealed her sentence in Bali's High Court and Indonesian Supreme Court respectively, but was denied. In December of 2014, she applied for a presidential pardon, but wasn't granted that either, and she remains behind bars with no set date for her execution.
Thanks for watching. If someone brutally murdered your parents, would you want them executed? Or would you rather they spend the rest of their life alone in a Supermax prison cell? And why? Let us know in the comments section below.